Good. So this is Brad Stone. I don't know. I guess I'm supposed to introduce you.
Well, let me introduce you instead.
Oh, no.
Okay, so I wrote my book, The Everything Store, about Amazon. It came out 5 years ago. I still report and write about Amazon. But when I do, my first call is always to Shira, who is a Bloomberg opinion columnist, because she is also a genius when it comes to all things Amazon.
That's very kind. So now we've introduced each other. You introduced yourself, and then you introduced me. And I thought we'd structure our time here around sort of 3 sections, just so we know where we're going. First, I want to talk a little bit about culture at Amazon, and then about strategy, and then the kind of what's next / what could kill Amazon sort of questions. But I just want to start with a little bit about you and your book. So as you said, The Everything Store was published 5 years ago. What was the impetus for writing it?
You know, I covered Amazon first at Newsweek magazine. When my first interview with Jeff Bezos was in 2000 when the stock market was wobbling, and he was actually talking to a lot of press trying to make the case that Amazon's declining stock price wasn't that big of a deal. And then I covered Amazon for the New York Times. I was the Amazon beat reporter, and then for Bloomberg Businessweek. And the impetus was really like there had been great books about Apple and Facebook and Google, and it just occurred to me at one point that no one had written the great Amazon story. And it was because it was considered kind of a technology afterthought at the time, right? Like this wobbly e-commerce company that for a long time eBay was more important then. And so it was that, you know, I felt like Amazon was coming into its own.
And what do you think, if there was maybe 1 or 2 things that surprised you the most in reporting the book, either about Jeff Bezos himself or about Amazon? Is there anything you could single out?
The things that surprise, I guess the extent to which they had taken all of their pain, all their struggles, and their journey to create an e-commerce company, like a retail company, and pivoted from that into a company that basically makes other companies, like a company that has figured out how to create all the atomic building blocks that are needed for innovation, and also doesn't stymie them in a way that large companies often do. And so, like when I thought about, you know, when I told the story of AWS in my book, or the story of Marketplace, or the story you know, of the genesis of what was then Amazon Fresh, it was always sort of the same kind of recipe. Like, you know, they had an idea, they deputized one person to go out and do it. That person had like enormous leeway to go and raid other parts of the company for like great technical talent. They set them up often with all the computing building blocks they needed. And then they went and gave them a ton of investment and runway and didn't mess around with them.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about that, and maybe pick on one of those big bets that you mentioned at Amazon, because look, the whole challenge of companies, and particularly big companies, is how to stay innovative the bigger you get and really sow that culture of innovation from inside. So how does Amazon do that? Talk a little bit more about.
Well, let me use an example that's actually not in the book.
Oh, great.
That I'm actually trying to kind of understand better. So like this will be caveated with the fact that like I'm still, you know, an observer, like most of you, of the Amazon Go experiment, right? And it's very representative of how they do things.
And like, Go, for people who don't know, is this automated store where people, in theory, can walk in, pull stuff off the shelves, and walk out and have their merchandise charged automatically.
I might have the dates wrong, but like the first one showed up in Seattle, I think in 2016. It might have been, I think it was 2017, and then they trialed it for a year, and then it debuted this year, and now there are a couple. Well, you know, turns out this thing had its origins in like 2013. It was this guy named, I think his name is Dilip Kumar, who is a shadow of Jeff Bezos, this technical advisor role that Andy Jassy did way back when. This idea that they should, you know, bring their kind of technology orientation to physical retail. First few years characterized by like wild experimentation, by Dilip going to other teams and like basically stealing their best scientists. This long journey with, you know, remarkable amounts of runway. Like other companies might have been like, okay, you've tried it for 3 years and it's not quite working. You know, why don't you all come back and like be more productive? But they kept going. They seem to have like different ideas about, should we do this in big grocery stores? Should it be toy stores? You know, lots of different, should there be robots involved? Should people in these grocery stores be cutting your meat and giving you, you know, cheese samples? And then like at the end of the journey is the Go convenience store. and they are tinkering with the technology and coming up with different approaches to tracking people's, when they take things off the shelf. And like, to me, it's amazing, like a 5-year journey that we're still only seeing the very seeds of. So representative of how they approach talent, the versatility of the company, how they don't get in their way like other big companies do. And, and again, like just the kind of the willingness to take long-term bets and the investors' willingness to kind of tolerate it.
Right, and there was no pressure. There's no pressure in that 5-year period to commercialize the technology immediately or actually show that there's a path to making money from this
My
idea.
sense is, not only was there not pressure, but like Jeff and the S team would visit the various prototypes over the course of the lifespan of this project and send them back to the drawing board. So if anything, there's a tolerance for experimentation and kind of dead ends.
That's really interesting. So let me ask you about another sort of Amazon-y part of Amazon, which is, it's almost like a mantra at Amazon. Everybody from Jeff Bezos on down talks about how they focus on the customer and not on competitors, and that's the sort of secret of Amazon. So what does that mean at Amazon, really? And is it real or is it sort of spin, right?
I'm going to take a crack at this, but then I'm going to turn around and ask you that because, I remember the Journal had a story recently about, I think it was new baby registries and how Amazon was like surreptitiously putting ads on, and for like new parents or their relatives, they thought these were things on the registry and inadvertently buying them. And you made a comment on Twitter. It's like, what about customer centricity now?
That's right.
Which was like a pretty good point. It's like, yes, I think they get a lot of credit and they do have this religion of the customer, but we can identify all sorts of ways in which that's beginning to get a little fuzzy, right? Particularly with this advertising business, right? Because the idea of Amazon is all, Jeff would always say, I think it was in respect to the reviews, we help people make better decisions, right? And if you're selling top product placement and search results to an advertiser, arguably you are no longer in the business of helping people make great decisions. So I guess with that as a big caveat, I'd say, I'll reverse course and say, I think Amazon is customer centric, and you can see it in some of the decisions they make to forego revenue opportunities in pursuit of what they view as a customer-centric approach. And the kind of canonical example at the company, and the one that I use in my book, is when they shut down email marketing for a while. It's a little bit of an off-color example, but people, let's say, who are browsing in the adult category of Amazon were getting emails, recommendations, and Jeff thought, this could be embarrassing to a customer, and he got very upset about it. So there are a number of those different examples where I think they, where the customer mindset, embodies itself. But again, we can point to other examples where, they seem to be compromising a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And the adult product anecdote in your book also goes to another element of Amazon's culture, which is, Jeff Bezos has a bit of a reputation inside and outside the company of being a very incisive manager, but also ruthless. And that you wrote in your book that managers live in fear of getting a customer email forwarded from Bezos with just a question mark at the top of it. That's when you're really in trouble.
That's the escalation, right? And
The
you get that email and your life is ruined and you don't go home for the next 2 days.
That's right. So is that kind of ruthlessness in the culture, where you also say that confrontations, even violent confrontations, are pretty common, is that an essential part of Amazon's success, or is it's a success in spite of those ruthless parts of the culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that you would have to argue that it's success, right? That they, have a culture of, that they call in their leadership principles kind of disagree and commit, right? By, contentious debate, rigorous study of a topic, getting to the right answer and then committing to a path. There's a phrase in the leadership principles which you can look at on the website, which is something along, I can't recall it exactly, but like, and it may not even be in the latest version, but it's like, we don't compromise for social cohesion. And that was a phrase, that Jeff had used a lot, which is like this tendency where you put people in the room of everyone to be, convivial And like that, there's a belief that that can get in the way of sound decision making. So yeah, I think, that they, that they would probably argue it's healthy confrontation. And I think also, Amazon has a reputation of being a difficult place. It's now a company that employs basically 1 million people when you count, the seasonal workers. And so, you can find examples of lots of different things in a company that large. And I do also think that over the 5 years since the book came out, and the very critical New York Times story came about the culture, like it's also evolved somewhat. I think maybe to some extent it's a little bit, maybe a little bit friendlier.
Is there an Amazon without Jeff Bezos?
It's really hard to imagine, right? When you think about what like the Amazon leadership team, the S team, would have to discuss right now, they're going deep on AWS. They're going deep on the device group under this guy named Dave Limp. Then they've got the India business and the international business, and then the dynamics of the third-party marketplace and how it works with the first-party retail business. And it's such a span of now very complicated businesses that, frankly, I think that like Jeff Bezos is probably one of the few people in the world, if not the only people in the world, with the versatility, and the intelligence to do everything. So it's hard, it's hard to imagine Amazon without Jeff, to be honest.
And yet you've also said that Amazon has a pretty deep bench, and if you look at the senior leadership there, it's been very stable, even though I'm sure any one of those people could have been poached long ago. So what's the secret of?
Well, when you think of Jeff Wilke, who runs the retail business, who's been there since '99, and Andy Jassy, who runs AWS, who's been there even longer, and then a couple other folks around them. Yeah, you do have a pretty stable bench, but yeah, you do wonder like who can cross over like Jeff does to both parts of the business.
Yep. So let me segue a little bit to talk about strategy, and I'll start by asking the big question, which is, what do you think is the most underrated strategic decision that Amazon has ever made? And also answer, what's the most overrated strategic decision?
Oh, this is hard. It's not. I wish I had a minute to think about this. It's not.
No.
The thing is that the decision, obviously, to launch AWS, right? You can't really say it's underrated. Maybe it's a little under-examined or poorly understood. But the idea of what was then back in 2000, basically a retail business, to go spawn an enterprise computing business that would clobber all the incumbents and change the courses of Google and Microsoft is remarkable. And I write about it in my book, like the journey to AWS, that's based on like Amazon's struggles with its own computing resources, and Jeff realizing that we need this too, that it would make their life easier if they had something like AWS, and the way in which they had kind of atomized their culture around these small, quote, 2-pizza teams. So, if you're a small team and you don't want a lot of collaboration because it slows you down, what kind of infrastructure do you need to spin that up quickly? And then having a guy like Andy Jassy, who had also been a shadow, who, studied at the, side of Jeff Bezos to go and like run that, is like, I think probably one of the defining strategic moves of our time. And then overrated. Maybe, let's see, overrated. I don't. What would you say to cruelly turn it? Okay, I'm just buying some time.
So this is more of a maybe overrated technology. There's a lot of talk about how smart Amazon is with the algorithmic suggestions, and yet, again, just personally, every time I look at the suggested recommendations from Amazon, they're always either stupidly obvious, like I bought a bicycle pump. Amazon will then recommend 1,000 more bicycle pumps, or sort of so strange that it seems perverse. Like I remember for a while Amazon was recommending industrial cleaning products and tools as though I were planning a murder and then to clean up the murder.
That's a great answer, because they get a lot of credit, right? As like they know you better than anyone, and yet somehow they seem to be not that smart. But I, of course, in my moments, I came up with an answer, which is, at this point, you could argue that Alexa right now is overrated.
Yep.
They're trying to define a next generation of computing. It hasn't been an accelerant for the retail business because, as recent studies, probably from CB Insights and others, have shown people aren't buying things on Alexa. So it's kind of like it's a technology wave in sort of search of a business. They sell a lot of these devices at cost. I mean, I'm sure they'll get there, but right now you might argue that it's a little bit of unrealized potential. And by the way, my wife walks around her house unplugging them because she's so uncomfortable with the idea of these listening devices in her home. So I think Amazon and Facebook and Google and Apple still need to convince us and convince a lot of people to be comfortable with these devices.
So let's talk a little bit about being a partner with Amazon. So they're, I think, fairly notorious for doing things like talk about the example from your book about the Wusthof knives.
Right.
And what that shows about being a company that sells products on Amazon.
Yeah, so and there are more current incarnations of this challenge, but this was a German knife maker who found when they sold on on Amazon that their other channel partners would complain because Amazon relentlessly kind of demands the lowest price, that knockoffs were showing up on Amazon. Amazon wasn't kind of respecting their brand. There was a great article in Recode recently, basically about the same thing is still going on. Of course, there's different complications now where you might find that Amazon's private labeling your product has found the same set of manufacturers in China. Your brand's not protected. There might be fraudulent sellers. So Amazon has this complicated relationship with brands. 5 years ago, it kind of opened the floodgates to Chinese manufacturers to sell internationally on Amazon. You saw a tremendous acceleration in Amazon's retail business as a result, but it kind of opened the doors to anarchy. And I think a lot of businesses feel that complexity in their relationship with Amazon. And then we see the kind of onset of a new set of relationships like a Nike, or actually Apple's the best example because they recently agreed to sell recent iPhones and iPads on Amazon, and then they go and kick all of the independent sellers off the platform. So Amazon does seem to be carving out a different kind of relationship and agree with brands, and then agreeing to go police the kind of anarchy of their marketplace.
And do you think there's anything from Amazon's history? Is there anything that brands or sellers can learn about if you do business with Amazon? How do you avoid getting steamrolled, or is it just an inevitable part of doing business with that company?
I mean, I think you need to make sure that you have a unique selling proposition, that you have a relationship with your customers that probably extends beyond the Amazon platform, because Amazon basically owns that relationship. That you have a good way to police your own supply chain so that as difficult as that is, so your intellectual property doesn't end up in the hands of a manufacturer that might clone your product at a fraction of the price. I mean, I guess those are the obvious things, and the best things I can think of. The rules of business today, I would say, you can't really avoid Amazon, that it has such velocity and a hold, particularly, in North America and Europe, that, if you're not selling on Amazon, you're probably missing a pretty big revenue opportunity.
So again, your book came out 5 years ago, where it almost seems 5 years ago, Amazon was quaint. By comparison, it was something like $75 billion in sales, and this year it's going to be $230 or something like that.
I like to joke that if I had done nothing more with my life other than invest my book proceeds in Amazon stock and then retire to a beach, I'd probably be in better shape.
So yes, when your book came out, Amazon was valued at something like $125 billion, and now it's $800+ billion. So yeah, that would have been a good idea.
Unfortunately, as journalists, we're really not allowed to do that.
What has surprised you most in the last 5 years about the new areas that Amazon has entered?
I mean, I think even as I sort of called Alexa an overrated decision, the idea of them going, you can trace the line from the Kindle to the Fire tablet, to the Fire TV, and then to what appeared to be the disaster of the Fire phone, which really, for a time in 2014, seemed like that whole device division was in jeopardy. And then from the ashes of that, to go and at least make an attempt to define the next generation of personal computing is remarkable. Again, in the same vein, going from the disappointment of Amazon's efforts in China to going and making a multi-billion-dollar bet in India, where you had a competitor run by former Amazon employees in Flipkart, to go all in the way they have in a country where I actually was there a couple months ago for a Business Week story, with terrible infrastructure and real challenges in terms of like scaling a national e-commerce business. So the way in which, and again, in the same vein, taking again the disappointment and maybe some of the failed experiments and assumptions of Amazon Fresh, the grocery business, which kind of mimicked the Amazon fulfillment center model of like, we're going to put groceries in a warehouse and drive them into the city, and then of course that didn't work, and so they go and buy Whole Foods. Yeah. So I guess I would summarize as being like the way in which their disappointments and sort of failures leave a trail of breadcrumbs into new things where they bet even bigger, kind of embodies the relentlessness of this company when they're tackling new markets to go and like try things and keep going.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You're right. I mean, Fresh is a good example, right? That's a project that Amazon did for 10 years with very little success, and then all it took to make it a semi-success, I guess, was to spend $14 billion buying a grocery chain.
And there's still, and there's still, a tiny little amount of the overall, even online grocery market. So we can't declare it a success, and they're still working to like bring Whole Foods into their distribution system. But evidence perhaps that they're not going to quit.
Right. So what do you think, looking ahead, is the greatest risk to Amazon, either internal risk or from the outside, external?
I'm probably like the key man one, right? That Jeff decides to go do something else, as we talked about before. Kind of unclear, what. But I don't think that'll happen, right? I think that this is still like, he's still in there for the long term, in terms of decades, most likely. So, that aside, probably it's their macro risks. Like you look at Amazon, and I'm a customer, right? I shop on Amazon over the holidays. I've got the Alexa devices, even though they're now mostly unplugged. I watch the Amazon shows. They've got a model that works, and it's really hard to see what'll stand in their way. If there was a recession, right, or like a significant macro event, then Amazon probably mirrors the health of our economy in a lot of ways. So I think that probably would be another risk.
And do you think much about this kind of external risk, about Trump criticizing the company at every turn, people on the left and the right talking about Amazon as a monopoly, some of this backlash on HQ2 and things like that? Do you think that's a serious risk, or that's noise?
Well, regulators aren't the most fleet-footed of creatures. And so, when you look at the Microsoft case, which, spanned a decade, right, at least. Yeah. So yeah, I think that is a serious kind of long-term risk, but, certainly not immediate. And also, like, let's say we were to just jump to say, at some point the government decides to break up Amazon. Like, so what? These pieces already operate so independently that you would think that like they probably would, not a lot would change.
Yeah. Okay. We have a couple minutes left, so this is going to be the speed round, or the, I think, semi-speed round, because we're journalists and we can't think that fast. So what do you think, make one prediction about a category or industry that Amazon is going to enter next and how they'll do.
Well, so the next thing, or it doesn't have to be MDME. I mean, healthcare is obviously the one that they're working hard on, right? They've got this joint venture with Buffett and JP Morgan. They've got a whole division, their Grand Challenge division, where they've got kind of former Google X people working on healthcare type things. They bought PillPack. They want to be a pharmacy. So kind of that's one. But we don't know, that could be in 5 years. I think transportation, right, is something that they keep moving further into. So, today, maybe they're delivering, single-digit percentage of their volume in major cities, and you can kind of see that, increasing steadily, particularly if the post office raises rates, and eventually offering kind of this last mile delivery as a service to their sellers.
Yeah, and do you see that as being the next AWS, I think, is how people talk about it, right? As you can see Amazon delivering for themselves and then becoming a delivery service for everybody else.
I mean, when you look at the history of Amazon, it's every piece of their supply chain that they've mastered, they have turned around and offered it as a service. And so, yeah, that's part of the blueprint.
Okay, last question. What was the last thing you bought on Amazon and why?
Okay, well, actually, that one is easy because I live in San Francisco, and recently we had an enjoyable week of toxic smoke from the nearby wildfires, and so I bought an air purifier for the home to labor under the illusion that we were breathing slightly healthier air for the span of this week. So I'm pretty sure that was the last product. You know, I think I've ordered some stuff for the holidays for the kids and stuff, but I'm a pretty, you know, Jeff didn't like my book, and I got a bad review from his wife, and
She literally wrote a review.
yeah, 1-star review.
Right.
Yep, a little badge of pride. But I'm like a huge Amazon customer. Like if I were to chart my Amazon purchases over the last 20 years, it would probably, you know, it would resemble the stock price a little bit up and to the right.
You're responsible for 100 billion of that market cap.
Yeah. But not quite that.
Well, thanks very much,
Thank you,
Brad,
Shira.
and thanks everybody. Really appreciate it.